Man, Hi-Fi Rush is just so good on so many levels. This is clearly just one of those games where someone was in the meeting where they were designing the game and they were like, hey, should we make this game one of them, one of them good games? And after much deliberation, they had numerous meetings about this decision, and then they came back and they said no, because they wanted to make this a great game. But seriously, this game is just really great from top to bottom. The dialogue is fun, the combat is fluid and feels great, and while the platforming is clearly not really a focus, it never actually overstays its welcome before getting you back into the action. Plus, I think that the game is actually really smart in how it designed its rhythm mechanics, and on top of that, they incorporated those mechanics into the spectacle fighter genre pretty much flawlessly in a way that I think builds upon it and makes the game even greater than the sum of its parts. Also, as a quick tangent, I know that the more common term for the genre that games like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta fall into is technically the character action genre, but I've kinda never really been a fan of that name for the genre since it's so generic, so I prefer to use the term spectacle fighter since I think it's a better and more specific descriptor of the kind of vibes these games are going for, so I'll be continuing to use that term from now on. So what is it that makes this game so smart? Well, in the last few years, we've seen a fair number of games that I think fall into this sort of rhythm hybrid genre, where you mix rhythm mechanics with some other form of gameplay. So instead of just playing a game like Dance Dance Revolution or Guitar Hero, which is entirely about just the rhythm gameplay, you instead get a game like, say, Crypta the Necrodancer, which combines the rhythm element with a roguelike dungeon crawler to make some kind of tense, quasi-real-time turn-based combat system. And similarly, games like Bullets Per Minute and Metal Hellsinger combine rhythm mechanics with first-person shooters. Now, these games are all pretty great in their own right, but the rhythm mechanics I feel don't necessarily mesh themselves into those other genres very smoothly. Again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying these games are bad, just that the rhythm mechanics don't really directly enhance the other mechanics of those games directly. What I mean by this is that in games like BPM, it's like you're playing a shooter and a rhythm game simultaneously, rather than a more specific rhythm shooter, if that makes sense. Another way of maybe thinking about it is that the rhythm gameplay tends to be used to just add an additional challenge to the other game type, making the player have to now multitask between effectively playing two different kinds of games at the same time. Looking more closely at BPM specifically, if we focus purely on the shooting element of this game, it's pretty much just a traditional shooter for the most part, but instead of being able to fire your gun all willy-nilly, you have to now restrict your firing to match the beat. And similarly, in order to reload, instead of simply pressing a reload button and being done with it, now you have to press the button multiple times in a row and also match the beat with that as well, or else you might flub your reload. And overall, you're still just aiming, shooting, and reloading just as you would in any other shooter on top of these extra challenges. So like I said, the rhythm gameplay, it doesn't really make it easier to perform any of the first-person shooter gameplay. You still have to aim and hit enemies with the same skills that you would normally use in pretty much any other shooter. Maybe you could say that the rhythm mechanics might help you be more mindful of the ammo left in your magazine, since you don't want to be stuck wasting beats trying to shoot when you're out of ammo. And I guess it also maybe helps make it a little bit easier to dodge certain attacks to some degree. But overall, like I said, I think that games like BPM and Crypta the Necrodancer and the like are more about adding additional complexity and challenge to the existing other game genre more than anything else. Now this all seems kinda obvious, right? You have thing A and thing B and you combine them together and you get A plus B. But the point that I'm getting at is that I believe that Hi-Fi Rush directly improves upon the spectacle fighter genre with its rhythm mechanics, and that the normal spectacle fighter games like Devil May Cry and such could possibly even be directly improved by incorporating some of these rhythm-like mechanics. For example, let's just take a look at one specific mechanic that is common to most spectacle fighters, the delay combo. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this is a system that these games tend to use to add more combo variety to their weapons without actually having to increase the number of different buttons you have to use. Essentially, all it is a normal combo where you hit the same button repeatedly to perform a string of attacks, but in place of one or more of those button presses, you actually don't press the button and wait for a moment before pressing the next input. However, for a lot of new players, this can actually be pretty unintuitive, especially if they're trying to figure this out for themselves. For example, just look at one Peach Saliva's attempts to learn about Cerberus's delay combo in Devil May Cry 3 during her first time playing through the game.
So you know how Rebellion has tap, wait, and then hit it? Mm-hmm. This has tap, tap, wait, and then hit it a couple times.
I don't understand.
Nope, too fast.
What? Oh my god, okay, so...
Y, or triangle, triangle, wait.
Like that?
No. Like this.
I need rhythm. That's so much delay.
It sure is.
So
it's to make it easy.
So ba-ba, do I need to hold it?
No.
Okay.
If you were paying attention, you might even notice during this clip that she even specifically calls out that it would probably be a lot easier to understand if she had a proper rhythm in the game to go off of. And I think this is a fairly normal reaction to this mechanic at first. It's kinda weird to continue a combo by not pressing a button, and it's not very intuitive to understand exactly how long you need to wait before pressing another input again. And some games might even complicate it further by having you mix and match attack buttons with the delay and such, which can just add more to manage with the mental stack that might contribute to flubbing the controls. But in Hi-Fi Rush, delay combos are immediately made a lot more intuitive with the addition of these rhythm mechanics. Now, instead of a more nebulous amount of time that is based on the animation of the individual attack, which many players might not even really be paying attention to mid-fight, now it's based on the actual rhythm of the background music. You can literally write out how combos work in this game like you're writing sheet music, and the steady beat of the game makes it immediately obvious just how long of a pause you need to wait in order to pull off a beat combo. I mean, I don't really claim to be any kind of pro at these kinds of spectacle fighter games, but I mean, I've been around the block a few times by now, and I still flub these inputs from time to time just due to the intense rush and occasional panic that these games can often inflict during the heat of battle, especially when you're surrounded by groups of enemies all at once and have so much to keep track of. But in Hi-Fi Rush, everything moves to the beat of the background music. I mean, the game literally has almost every element of the environment around you, in every level, constantly bouncing to the rhythm of the song, including the HUD, the player's animations, all the enemy animations, and just everything in the game. And as a result, that makes it almost trivial to remember the timings for how all of your moves work. In another game, it can be hard to describe the timings of certain moves without resorting to clapping your hands like a lunatic mid-conversation. But in this game, you can just be like, oh, this move is 1 beat and this move is 2 beats, and if you wait a beat, you can do something else, and it's almost instantly understandable even to a novice player. When I first picked up the game and learned what the rest combo was to launch my enemies, I almost instantly understood it, and I almost never flubbed the input. And for that matter, the nature of the game's rhythm mechanics helps improve upon other aspects of the spectacle fighter genre as well. Having everything happen on the beat really helps counteract some bad playstyles. Most significantly is the common trend to resort to button mashing when you're in a bad situation. It's all too common for new and even some more experienced players to sometimes mess up during a fight, lose their place, start taking damage, and you just kind of end up panicking and trying to land a hit as quickly as possible to regain control of the fight, resulting in you just mashing attack buttons to try and regain control. And even when you're not in that kind of situation, I know I'm guilty of being the type of player that will sometimes just mash my next input like crazy while I'm waiting for my current animation to finish so that I can get the next attack out as quickly as possible. instead of actually, like, just learning the timings of the moves like you're supposed to. But again, these are all solved issues in Hi-Fi Rush. From minute one, you're encouraged to only bother attacking on the beat, and in what I think is a pretty genius move, even if you press the button off beat, you still only attack when the next beat would come up. So you get zero benefit from trying to mash out your attacks faster, or maybe just making a mistake and not hitting the button on the exact right beat. And I mean, it's only natural to bob your head or tap your feet to the beat of a song, so pressing buttons to the beat of a song almost feels second nature as soon as you get your hands on the controller. And once you get used to only pressing buttons on the beat, then even when you get into a panicky situation, I've personally found that it's much easier to stay on that rhythm and not resort to button mashing, especially when you know that all the enemies also attack you on the beat. So as long as you can catch an enemy's tail, then they rarely catch you off guard, since the timing of their tails is that much easier to see. And on that note, that actually leads right into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is how it incorporates the defensive options that are common to the spectacle fighter genre. Now, I'm sure everyone loves themselves a good parry. I know I do, and parries can often be some of the most satisfying, most hype things you can experience in a game like this. Landing that parry and a counter follow-up against that big boss attack can just feel so good. But in turn, they're usually very difficult to pull off, which is a very fair design choice. There's nothing really wrong with making parries hard to do in exchange for being so rewarding. Not everything in your game has been made to be as accessible as possible, and requiring some skill is fine. But on the other hand, this can result in people avoiding your mechanic simply because it becomes too difficult to engage with that system. I know that while I personally love parrying things, I almost never use things like Royal Guard in Devil May Cry. It's just a bit much for me to keep track of, especially when I have to actively replace my ability to dodge or do other cool sword combos in order to use it. So I'm just often not motivated to practice when it's just so much easier to rely on the dodge and not have to learn all of the individual enemy timings in order to actually be able to parry them effectively. But back in Hi-Fi Rush, all the enemies attack on the beat. So instead of having to learn potentially dozens of different enemy attack patterns and what the exact timing is for each of those attacks, you have a very standardized system of knowing that if an enemy gives you a tell on one beat, then you know that there's probably another attack coming on the next beat. So it becomes more of a matter of trying to predict exactly which beats the enemies are going to attack you on and responding accordingly, which just makes it a lot easier to handle when you have these distinct time units that is the beat of the background music. And to be fair, this sounds like it's just making parrying a lot simpler and easier, but they actually put some real thought behind the mechanic too. It's not just a matter of enemies giving you a single obvious cue and then attacking on the next beat, though that is the most basic form of it. They also have lots of attacks where enemies will queue up a whole string of attacks, each with their own rhythms and combos, making it so that you have to dodge or parry not just one or two, but 3 or 4 or even more attacks in a row if you want to actually defend against all of it at once. So there's still actual depth behind the mechanics, and it still adds a lot more challenge than you might immediately assume from just the rhythm-based system. But at the same time, the basic notion of landing a parry on the beat makes it that much more intuitive to start engaging with the system. And that's really a huge important factor when it comes to designing mechanics like this. You want to get your players engaged with your simplified versions of your systems early on, so that they have a reason to try and learn and master the system over the course of the game. So at the beginning of the game, sure, the parry mechanics are far simpler than probably even the most generous spectacle fighter mechanics. But because it gives you that very easy entry point into the system, then that naturally leads to intuitive practice with the system throughout the game's length until hopefully by the end you master it, and now you're fighting bosses that are queuing up half a dozen attacks with a complicated rhythm that you're just casually parrying like it's nothing and feeling really badass about. I could probably keep gushing about this game for hours and hours if I felt like sitting down and recording for that long, but I think you get the idea by now. Unlike a lot of other rhythm hybrid games, which are still great in their own regards, Hi-Fi Rush directly uses its rhythm mechanics to enhance and make its spectacle fighter mechanics that much more intuitive and easier to understand and pull off in gameplay. And I mean, let's be real here for a minute. The whole point of the spectacle fighter genre, as the name may suggest, is to try and look as rad as possible while beating up bad guys. And beating up bad guys to the beat of the background music is a great way to look badass while doing it. There's a reason why tons of movies like Baby Driver and the like have cool action scenes where they do exactly that and have scenes that go in line with the music that's being played. I mean, hell, I'm pretty sure in an interview they directly stated that the films of Edgar Wright directly inspired them to make this game in the first place. And in turn, everything I've talked about up to this point, making your defensive options easier so that you can then in turn continue your combos for longer, being able to master your different types of combos by knowing exactly what the timings of all of your attacks are, and just so much more to this game, all of that contributes to this ability to look as stylish as possible while you're playing it. So yeah, by all means, if you're making a genre hybrid game, the two genres don't necessarily need to mesh this well. Often just the mixing of the genres can lead to their own great unique things, like when people started combining roguelikes and card games, or shooters with puzzles. But in my opinion, the best genre hybrids are the games that manage to combine their component parts in such a fluid and seamless way that the end result becomes far greater than the sum of its parts. And Hi-Fi Rush is definitely one of those games. Thank you so much for watching my breakdown, and if you haven't gotten the message by now, be sure to go out and give Hi-Fi Rush a shot. I'm certain that if you've made it this far, you're probably going to love it. And for that matter, make sure to check out Peach Saliva's stream that I showed from that clip earlier. Despite what I showed, she's actually doing pretty great for a first-timer, and she's currently playing through all the Devil May Cry games in order right now. And remember, if you liked the video, be sure to let me know. If you want to help me make more videos like this in the future, then make sure to subscribe. I'll catch you all later.